I'm Kelly Merritt, editorial page editor at the Daily Mail, opinion page.
I'm Whitney Burdett, editorial writer for the Daily Mail opinion page.
I'm Dawn Miller. I'm the Gazette opinion page editor.
I'm Eric Hare, I'm the State House reporter at the Gazette Mail.
Kenny Kemp, photographer.
I met everyone here for the very photographer. My name is Mike Bush. I'm currently the delegate to represent the district that we're in, 37th district. I'm a cab driver, as I do for a living. I'm also a professional musician. But early, when I first decided to run 2 years ago, I felt like that my job put me in a position to really know the folks in the district. And I think that feeds into my philosophy of how to best govern, how to best represent the people of the district, is to go around the people of the district, actually listen to them, find out what is important to the people that I'm supposed to be representing, and carrying that conscience to the State House and being like a real representative of this district. I can tell you that is what influences me. And unfortunately, in politics these days, there's too much, and I've seen it up there all too much, there's too much influence from lobbyists, there's too much influence from money, too much influence from outside interest groups. And what influences me are my neighbors, the people that I'm up there, the task of representing. And I think it's an honor and it's a privilege that I don't take lightly. I take it very seriously. This is not a game to me. This is not a sport to me. We're dealing with people's lives up there, and I take that job very seriously. I'm often the first one up there during the session, during the day, and one of the last ones to leave. I try to stay involved in any community activity I can to get out there amongst the people that I'm supposed to be representing and listen to.
Well, my name's Thomas Goodman, and I've been in Charleston for 10 years now. And I'm otherwise just some guy. I am a West Virginia success story. I'm a native of Beckley. I quit high school in about 2000 and left the state, where I had to go through quite a considerable process of making up for that mistake. And in that time, I learned a lot. I went and got a degree in television production. I went to film school, actually, and came back. I've been here 10 years now. And the reason that I decided to run for office was I've seen a lot of things change in 10 years, but most of it has not been for the positive in the area. And in that time, I've gotten to know a few people. I kind of keep to myself, and one of the biggest things that I kept hearing from people over and over and over again is that they don't feel like they're being presented with any sort of forward ideas. We're kind of rehashing some concepts, and we're coming through to these marketing campaigns is almost what they equate to, and people kind of want to see action. So in that, I met with some people in the community and came up with a very simple and specific platform that I thought I could affect as a delegate, and that's what I call the 3 R's, and that's not reading, writing, arithmetic. That couldn't hurt. It's restoration, recovery, and reform. And by that, what I would like to see is a tax credit for reviving old buildings to modern LEED standards. People want to see these buildings full, and that's not something that's endemic just to 37. That's a statewide issue, and that is also a direct jobs bill. Jobs get created when there is work to be done. So by doing that, you create jobs, you breathe life into these old buildings. The second is recovery, which is to fund our health care programs that are community and county based. That's our front line on the drug problem. And I think that while we're in this period of austerity, they really need to have the attention. That's where someone who has no other avenues to recovery are going to go to get that initial help. And then reform, I'm a real big Metro government supporter. I think that it's not only something that should be examined, but I think that we need to take it in the legislature as an extension of home rule programs, give counties that consolidate the ability to pay for their own future so that we can have the level of services that we're used to in the state of West Virginia. I feel like I'm otherwise a success story. I work for a family business. I have 2 small boys, and I'm in it to win it for the state of West Virginia, not because I want to gain something and not because I want to gratify myself, but because I want to stay in West Virginia and help other people find a way to be successful.
You've actually answered part of my first question. So I'll just start with you, Mike. And what do you describe as the biggest issues facing West Virginia, and what can the legislature do about it?
I've always thought the biggest issue facing West Virginia, it's really a matter of priorities. We have budget issues right now. That's going to be the biggest issue for the next several sessions, is how do we responsibly run state government. I think, to me, the biggest issue is really prioritizing education. I was recently appointed to and I feel very honored to have been appointed to the local school improvement council for Mary C. Snow West Side Elementary. It's a brand new school, fairly new school. It was consolidated from several schools on the west side, and we continually have the lowest test scores in the state. That if we're going to do anything to help the west side, that's where we got to start. So on a state level, we need to prioritize funding education, whether it's universal pre-K. The kids on the west side, a lot of them aren't getting any. They're not in a classroom before kindergarten. They're showing up at kindergarten without knowing an alphabet. They're already starting with a disadvantage because there's like 80 children in the kindergarten over at Mary C. Snow. There's only less than 50 spots available in their pre-K. And unfortunately, a lot of the parents over there aren't seeking out other avenues to get their kids into school before kindergarten. And so I would say funding of universal pre-K, funding of K through 12. That's how we're going to bring more jobs to the state. That's how we're going to improve the economy of the state and higher education. We continually cut higher education in the state too. And you see states that are successful put money into higher education. That brings research jobs. That creates jobs and has a well-trained workforce that's going to attract industry. So I think it's a matter of prioritizing that. The state has budget issues right now, but we're not going to cut our way out of it. We are going to have to invest in the future of the state, and that comes from funding education.
Any further, the state's priorities are the biggest problems in the state?
Well, the platform that I've chosen, they are problems. I don't know that they're the biggest problems. It's just problems that I felt like I could affect that would have the most direct impact on my district. I think that, at this point in time, the bottom line biggest problem that we have in West Virginia is drugs. And that's a chicken and egg problem. Are we in a drug-fueled crisis because we don't have opportunities, or is it that we don't have opportunities because we're in a drug-fueled crisis? I'm in a real unique position with my line of work where I get to deal with both ends of the spectrum. I get to deal with people who are employers, both large scale and small scale, and I deal with people who are scraping together cans in order to pay their bills or get a pack of cigarettes or whatever that money may go to. So I think that we need to really think outside of the box on how we're treating drugs. On the individual level, yes, it is a health crisis. It's something that an individual who is using addictive drugs, they're going through these physical ailments, and they're going through whatever turmoil they're going through mentally that put them on the path. So in that aspect, I think that we need to identify what makes people start doing drugs in the first place. Is it a cultural thing? Is it an economic thing? I think that we should examine that. And then on the other hand of it, on the punitive side of dealing with the people that bring drugs into our state, they treat it like a business. And I think that the state needs to look at that and say, how can we keep these people from wanting to do this business in our state? Unfortunately, West Virginia's been really good at running businesses out of the state. Why not kind of take some of those same concepts and see how we can stop drug dealers from looking at West Virginia and seeing that it's an easy market?
And how would you do that? Did you have some, I saw on your Twitter, you have some proposal to tax drug dealers or something?
Well, I don't know if it's a proposal, but I think it's a concept that should be explored. It's laws that are on the books in North Carolina and Tennessee, where if you get arrested with a predetermined trafficking amount of drugs, you're going to go to jail, absolutely. But they're also going to take that and tax it by volume. And I think that that's worth looking into. You know, these people that are, you know, it's like the overdose in Huntington. You know, when they came in to Markham Terrace and they really cracked down, they found a significant quantity of drugs. So I think that the people that are financing, the people that are running these drugs through our state, you know, when their people start getting hit with this large tax lien, and tax liens are very, very difficult to get away from. You can't just get them discharged, and it opens up to a lot of kind of financial leverage where you can get in and see who's really funding this stuff, where the paper trail's going. I do think that that should be an option, and I think that that's something that I would be willing to explore.
Can I say something about that?
Sure.
Under our current laws dealing with civil forfeiture in West Virginia, if somebody is suspected of being a drug dealer, we can currently take everything that they have. That is how the DEA is funded in this state. All over the country, West Virginia has extremely strict civil forfeiture laws. Anything less than 100% of everything they have, you essentially be offering drug dealers a tax break. Every high-level drug dealer knows this. They all know this. They risk losing everything.
So what you're saying is
It has
that
not
you're
deterred.
supporting letting drugs flow through the state?
No, I'm
Is that
saying
what
under our
understanding?
current law, they can take everything. So taxing them at whatever percent you're talking about would actually be a tax break. They already know this, and it hasn't deterred. Unfortunately, we have a huge demand for drugs in this state. As long as simple laws of supply and demand, as long as there's a demand here, there's someone who's going to step up and meet the supply, and nothing has deterred that. Not a civil forfeiture laws where they can lose everything that they own. So I think a tax that they're not going to be able to pay because they're going to be in prison isn't actually going to do the trick when they know they can already lose everything. But we really need to, and I'm not, you know, we need to step up our enforcement. We need to enforce the laws that are on the books, but we really need to put our money where our mouth is when it comes to curbing the demand. I have served on the front lines in this battle. I'm one of the things that I feel the most honored to do to try to help the community I live in is I serve on the board of advisors for the recovery point that's going in on the west side. So when it's open here in the next month and a half, we're going to be able to serve over 100 women. They do not need to have insurance. They don't need to have Medicaid. They will be able to stay there. It's through private funding sources and money through the Justice Reinvestment Act. We're going to be able to house over 100 women in that facility. That's going to make a difference. And as more things like that, we need to take that model from Recovery Point that started in Huntington, which was modeled off of Recovery Kentucky, and we need to duplicate that throughout the state. We need low-end facilities for people to get into so they have a safe place to recover and get back to work, get their lives back together, get their children back. That's what we need to be focused on. Unfortunately, over the past 2 years, we hear a lot of lip service about, you know, we have a drug epidemic. We haven't funded it. There was a bill that was floating around up there. It was named after a kid that I knew who he overdosed, and they found him at the Town Center Mall. It was the Ryan Brown Act. It was to create a fund to fund facilities like that. That bill died. That bill didn't make it out of a committee. Instead, what made it out of that committee was more mandatory minimum bills that died in the Senate, things that have been proven not to work.
Can I expand on this?
Sure.
You know, a forfeiture and a tax are not the same thing. You know, a forfeiture is going to target the guy that got caught. Okay, nobody gets into these things, these big dollar criminal enterprises saying, oh, I'm going to go down there and I'm going to get caught. No, that's just the low-level guy that had the stuff on him, and now he's out of a car, he's out of an apartment, he's out of a stereo, he's out of whatever he's lost. But that does not disincentivize the people that are funding him. You know, you don't turn up with $50,000 worth of heroin by walking the streets. You know somebody that is pushing that product into this area, and most of the time it is coming from way out of the state. So how do we get to those guys? You know, I agree that the people that want help have to have an easy avenue to get help. But what about the people that don't want help? And I think that it's been pretty well proven that to low-level guys, prison's not a deterrent. You know, that prison culture is almost a badge of honor for a certain subset of these guys. You know, and they go in there and they do their time, and then they get back out on the street, they call their guy in Detroit and say, hey, I'm Al, when can you get me set up? And that's how we have to stop it. You know, you can't make somebody go into recovery that doesn't want to go into recovery. And whatever reason they have, whether it's shame or health or you know, that's the people that they know, you give them an option, yes, but to say that taxing a top-level product is giving those people a break, I think is very insincere, and I think that we just kind of run the end around of the actual supply side of that. And that's what I guess I mean by saying that, you know, from a punitive perspective, that we have to look at that like a business. The criminals that have massive quantities of drugs and cash treat it like a business. They're not coming down here for no reason. They're coming down here because they want to make money on that. And if we remove the incentive for them to make money, say, gosh, man, you know, Jimmy the Fish sure got caught in West Virginia and he had $100,000 worth of drugs, and now he's, you know, gosh, we're looking at a possibility where the feds might be able to come and really look at our finances. That's a lot more of a deterrent than saying, well, we lost another car. You can get another car.
They
You can't get
everything
your
they
money.
own before they're even arrested.
Yes, I'm
They don't
aware
have
of
to be
that.
caught.
I'm aware.
Okay, well, we already have.
You have to have some sort of
We already have this
right?
deterrent. People know they can lose everything. They can lose. They all know they can lose everything when they get into this business. So it's already there.
But does that stop them, is my question.
No, it hasn't yet.
How you're going to tax a high-level drug dealer short of catching them?
Well, you do have to catch them.
Okay, so it is when you catch somebody and you think you have reason to believe that they have been dealing drugs, that's when you plan to assess them as tax and collect.
Correct.
Okay.
If you look at the laws that are on the book in North Carolina and Tennessee, what's really fascinating about these laws is that you can, as an individual, you can go and pay your taxes ahead of time. I don't know if anybody actually goes and does that, but it's very specific per substance, you know, and I didn't bring the figures with me, but you know, once you have over 42.5 grams of marijuana in North Carolina, it's assessed at $3.50 per gram. The harder drugs go up significantly, almost to the point where it's about an 80% excise. And I think that, you know, given in this last legislature, you know, we passed 80% on vapor products, okay, something that I really think kind of helps people that want to transition away from tobacco. And if we're going to put that kind of excise on that substance, you know, we should explore the advantages of taxing other illicit substances.
Okay.
80%, for the record, 80% would be a tax break. Right now, everything can be taken.
Did you get anything?
Yeah.
Okay, so I would like to hear each of you describe to me the best way you'd like to see the state's budget hole closed. What approach would you like the legislature to take? What combination of things to solve the problem? Who wants to go first?
I'll jump in first.
Okay.
I think that, you know, the way that the West Virginia government is structured, it's very top down. And the legislature makes decisions based on what they get out of the governor's office. You know, and I think that it's very well known at this point that there were some kind of omissions in the last projections that continue to decline. So I would like to see a little bit more transparency out of the executive's office. I'm not entirely sure what the best solution to provide that would be, you know, without a pretty significant change to the structure. But I think we have to take on all of the above. You know, we're going to have to look at cuts. Particularly, you know, executive side cuts in the agencies that they manage. And I think that we do have to start exploring, you know, where we can get kind of outside the box revenues from. I think that people, you know, individual citizens are kind of fed up with all the small taxes that we pay. You know, we tax everything from your income to your dog. And so I think that it's going to be very difficult to sell further increases on that. And I think that businesses are kind of fed up with feeling like they're being taken. But I think both sides on that are going to have to give a little bit and meet in the middle. Now, you can't, at this time, I don't see any sort of magic wand solution where we're going to just find this money through additional taxes on what's a shrinking business base and what's a shrinking population base. So we have to make the cuts. Now, to me, I think that a big responsibility for the incoming legislature is finding how we can make those cuts in a structured way so that the people who will have their jobs affected, and the people that do have, maybe government land contracts or outright government positions are let down in a way that they have the time to transition, and it's not just showing up one day and say, sorry guys, we're out of business, hope you do well. Because, we cannot continue to spend as we spend, and we cannot continue to use some of these agencies almost as jobs mills to keep our employment numbers up, because it's just not there. And I think that realistically, for the next 4 to 7 years, West Virginia is going to continue to be recessionary. And in that time, we have to increase the transparency, come up with ways to cut that everyone can agree on. We might not all like it, but we have to agree on it, and try to push this metro government and push more of the day-to-day financial responsibilities for services to counties and to municipalities, so that the entire state on the whole is not responsible for everyone's well-being.
I have to agree with what my colleague Delegate Rowe had mentioned in an op-ed recently. But we need to start earlier in the session, for one thing. And this has got to be our top priority. We put a lot of bills ahead of this last session and spent a lot of time on things, whether it was RFRA, raw milk, or concealed carry permits, when we should have been, the entire focus of the last session should have been from the start on the budget, and it should have been a more transparent process. That means the entire body, the body of the whole of the legislature working on it. And we've had, 2 years now, since I've been there for 2 years, the Republican Party has been in control for 2 years. They've run on eliminating waste, fraud, and abuse and balancing the budget based on cuts, and they haven't been able to identify enough significant waste, fraud, and abuse to cut in order to balance the budget. And what we did, we've used sweeping accounts and some money from the rainy day fund. Thank God we weren't able to take more from the rainy day fund, because we just needed to go back to it for flood relief. That's why it's called the rainy day fund. But anyway, we used one-time monies for ongoing expenditures. That's not the way to balance the budget. We're in the same place we were last year at this time because of that. So I can keep an open mind, and I can tell you with great certainty I will never sign a pledge to any outside interest group that says I will refuse to raise any taxes. Nobody wants to raise taxes. Everybody hates taxes. I hate taxes. But we have to have some sort of a balanced approach. We're not going to be able to cut our way to prosperity. So I favor progressive taxes. I'm not a big fan of regressive taxes. I'm not a fan of the food tax. There's been talk of bringing back half of the food tax. I would have a hard time supporting that. I think that affects lower income people would have had at a higher percentage than it does people who spend less percentage of their money on food. There's been talk of the 1 cent sales tax. That's also a regressive tax. But I think something like that, maybe if it was offset with a state earned income tax credit, that's been shown to also boost the economy. And I'm going to say this, and it's not something most Democrats will say. I'm not a fan of the business inventory tax. I think that stunts growth. I think you're taxing somebody's potential. It hurts small business. But if you look at our budget, about the size of the hole that we have in our budget, I think was from the reduction to the corporate net income tax. And I think if a business is doing well, that's a progressive tax. So I would like, I'd say revisit that one. Not a big fan of the inventory tax as you're taxing somebody's potential. But I'm not going to limit myself by saying I'm not going to raise any taxes at all. And unfortunately, enough of my colleagues did sign that pledge that put us in a special session that actually cost taxpayers even more.
Did you sign them, or did you sign the tax pledge?
No, I think I'm going to have to agree with Mr. Pushkin that those are very insincere, and especially as a potential freshman delegate, I would not feel like it would serve anyone properly to make such a broad statement.
Okay, go ahead.
We talked about this before, and it's all your view as a Republican. The question in the survey we asked was the RFRA, would you support another Religious Freedom Restoration Act? And
I
tell
would
us
not
about your answer.
support any social bills on either side of the spectrum. I really think that, and this is a kind of a fundamental belief for me, all rights are inherently equal. That's the way that our government was structured, and I think that if we start to segregate into smaller groups and pass legislation that favors one group one way or the other, then you start to dilute that. I think what we need to do is kind of address the people on either side's, RFRA specific, that have arguments and issues on this, because it is a very passionate issue. And I think the core of that issue is that there's enough precedent on the books now that says that the government has leeway to be the arbiter of a moral decision. And that is very upsetting to a lot of people, because morality is not necessarily something that everyone sees eye to eye on. So you have a group over here that has their defined set of morality, and you have a group over here that has their defined set of morality, and they're kind of button heads in the middle. And I think that rather than to try to find a legislative solution, I would like to see leaders of those communities come together and say, how can we all live together? West Virginia has very historically been an incredibly tolerant place. We're just all folk here, and if you look at the history, particularly in the coal fields, of how immigrants flowed through West Virginia, we were all able to get along very well. So what has happened in the last 10 years that's changed that? And I think that it's, lobbies on both sides of the spectrum, because that's your job. When somebody tells you to get in and help people find a legislative solution and they pay you, that's what you go and do. And I think that sometimes we get into these situations in a manner where we're not thinking of the real world application to these things, because we're very wrapped up in what an individual or what a group feels like they are experiencing, whether it's right or wrong. And I just don't feel that social issues are the kind of thing that are going to help us move forward in West Virginia at this time. If our economy was good and we were humming along at a good pace and everything, everybody was in full employment, we have a little bit more time that we can spend on talking about these things. But a rising tide lifts all the boats. And right now we need to worry about making sure that people have the ability to succeed and to pay their bills and to feed their family and to find more pathways to opportunity than to quibble about who's right and who's wrong on bedroom issues.
Obviously, I very vocally oppose the Religious Freedom Restoration Act. I believe we already have those freedoms guaranteed in the First Amendment of the Constitution. I am a member of a religious minority. I'm Jewish. My family has not experienced any religious discrimination since they made the great decision to come to America over 100 years ago. I didn't see the need for that bill, and unfortunately, it was the top priority of the Speaker of the House. He said so. He left the Speaker's podium and addressed the House from the floor in favor of that bill. That's not something that happens too often. So I can tell you my first vote will not be for a speaker whose top priority is the religious freedom restoration. I can see the other side of most issues. I said this, when I spoke about it on the House floor. I voted against right to work. I understand the other side of it. I voted against. There's a lot of bills that, I've gone back and forth on. I can understand the other side of an issue. When it comes to civil rights, I definitely see it right and wrong. Discrimination is wrong. And the purpose of that bill was to create an atmosphere where people could ignore the local non-discrimination ordinances. I don't see any room for discrimination in this day and age. And I do think that there is a right and wrong. And I do think West Virginians are very tolerant people, and I don't think most of them really care about this. I think it was a huge waste of time, and if it comes up again, I sincerely hope the leadership changes so it doesn't come up again. And I can also tell you, I'm very proud to have been, I wasn't the lead sponsor of the Employment and Housing Non-Discrimination Act in the House, but my name was second on the bill. And the lead sponsor most likely will be in the Senate next year. So I will introduce an end to bill, because I don't believe that anybody in West Virginia should be fired or evicted because of their sexual orientation.
Can I ask Mr. Fisher a question?
Sure.
Do you think that it is appropriate for the government on the whole to put any focus in any way on how people recreationally have sex?
I don't think the government has any, I don't think the sodomy laws are still on the books.
Well, that's not what I asked you, but okay. You know, that's ultimately what these issues are dealing with.
It's about discrimination. It's not, nobody's forcing anybody to
discrimination.
have sex in any certain way, shape, or form. It's about not discriminating against somebody because of who they love, Thomas.
Well, no, it's who you love is who you love, but principally, I think why a lot of these issues keep coming up, and it's how people want to identify.
They come up because it's election
I don't walk
politics.
around talking about how I like to have sex, and I don't want the government to come and paste anything on me because of how I like to have sex, and that's to a certain extent how I feel like a lot of these laws play out. We want to talk about sex, and people want to hang their identity on how they
I
want
want
to
to talk
have
about
sex.
budgets.
All right, well, Kelly,
I can tell you this, I didn't
I have a
accept
question
or
for
seek
Ken.
an endorsement from the Family Policy Council that pushed that. I would not accept their endorsement. I'm glad I didn't get it. You got it.
Yeah, I noticed that you said that people were, they were raising money for me. If they are, could you please ask them to send it? I could use it.
so Mr. Goodman, does that mean you would not support an ENDA bill?
Not at the state level, and that extends, really, the favorite things that I saw happen in our last legislature were the local act where counties can take control of their own road funding, and the brunch bill, because again, it deferred it to the counties. And I don't have an issue with counties or municipalities passing their own versions of social bills, because that's not a statewide, that is to your locality. And I think that it kind of comes hand in hand with our concept of freedom in America, for communities to live and govern themselves as they want. So, Charleston wants an ENDA and Williamson wants a RFRA. I don't think that that's out of bounds for either of those communities, because it's decided upon by the people that live there and not the people at the legislature. I think that broad bills like that are just not, they create so many divisions that kind of say that you as a governing official have a specific say in someone's life, and I'm not interested in that.
Okay, thank you. Yes, sir.
Briefly, discrimination is wrong no matter what county it's in. And if that was the attitude we had in after the Civil Rights Act was passed in 1964, we probably still have segregated lunch counters in parts of this country.
Thomas, are you saying that you won't want like a bill, like a RFRA bill with a local option in it? The county would actually vote their own RFRAs?
Well, I think that's, and again, for me, it all comes back to reforming into a metro government solution. That really, if I had to distill down to one specific reason that I would like to be a legislator, that's it. Because then we can give these consolidated entities an option to do those things, and kind of get the legislators out of the way. Again, and I'll stand by this as long as you like, I just don't think that top-down approach to what should ultimately be municipal level issues is successful for West Virginia. I don't think that it's paid dividends, given that that's how our government has been structured forever. And I think that we're having these fights internally because of it, and I think it would be better just to let communities control their own fate.
One thing, if you don't mind, we talked several times about metro government, and that's a big part of your platform. So if there's one thing that you could do, allow counties and municipalities to act locally. Well, metro government is the epitome of a local issue.
Mm-hmm.
And the legislature years ago, before I was there, passed the Consolidation of Local Governments Act, which is 7A of the West Virginia Code, which already allows for the people to decide, and that's how it should be done. The people have to decide they want a metro government. The state can't dictate a metro government. The state already did its job. They set in place the mechanism in which the people and the counties and the cities can form metro governments. We've had this here. The meetings occurred. That's what resulted in the Metro 911 in Kanawha County. That's what resulted in the Kanawha Charleston Health Department. Those are shared services. HUD, a shared service. But what you're talking about with the state doing it, we've already done that. So if that's your top priority, I might suggest you're running for the wrong office. You're running for mayor or Kanawha County Commissioner.
See, I disagree with you there, Mike, because the way that home rule is structured is that the state has to designate you a home rule community. And that's what I'm saying, we should extend that. Okay, we should at the top level as a legislature say, this is how we allow for community consolidation in West Virginia. You know, we've gone through a number of different models that were basically all or nothing, and they were not opt-in per community. And don't get me wrong, I understand what a gargantuan task this is. And the other thing that is very prohibitive to metro government in Charleston is that Charleston has kind of become this entity to a certain percentage of the communities that we have to reach out to in our area, akin to Washington, as it's viewed as this greedy, money grubbing. They take all of our tax revenue and they spend it downtown, and I don't see it in Cabin Creek. And that is what we have to overcome on the local level. But it all starts with the legislature saying, your community can do this, and we're taking our hands off of it.
And they already did. That was called the Consolidation of Local Governments Act, Section 7A of the code. Read it.
Any idea what year that was? Any idea what year that was?
I don't know. I don't know. It was before I got there, but it's in Section 7A of West Virginia.
He kind of raised the question I was going to ask anyway. Why running for the House and why this year? And then why you did that 2 years ago. You were the first one. And then I want to just add to your question after he answers why he's running for the House this year. You tell us why you ran for the House when you did 2 years ago, and then any advice you would have for a freshman delegate. So based on what you've learned in your one term. But start with you. Why the House 37th district? Why this year?
Well, you know, it's kind of interesting to me the circumstances that led me here. Like in the last 12 months, 15 months, my wife and I have had 2 small boys. I started a family business, and then I got into this. So I really keep a full schedule. And what had happened, just to be full disclosure, 3 days before filing, a friend of mine in the Republican Party called me and said, would you be interested in doing this? And my answer was, oh, you must be desperate. And I thought about it for a couple of days and talked with my family and talked with my business partner and said, you know, if we do this, it's going to be a time sink. And if I am to get elected, you know, I'm gone 60 days. And we're just, you know, that's the reality of the operations of the business. But the more I thought about it, you know, I hate to be direct in this, but, you know, I watch the legislature pretty closely as a hobby just because, you know, part of being West Virginian, I think, is that you get to play in the process, and it's a very small community. But I was just so unimpressed with Mr. Pushkin that I felt like to enter my ideas into the arena at this time, good, bad, or indifferent, were helpful. You know, I watched this guy introduce over 20 pieces of legislation, and none of them got out of committee. And I think that as a freshman delegate, you know, it's probably better to find an issue that you think you can affect. And for me specifically, in the short term, it's the green building tax credit. I think that's something that I might be able to get done in the 2-year term and move forward on something that's actionable. You know, something that I've heard said over and over and over as I'm talking to voters in this district is that they didn't feel like anything got done the last time. And I think that, you know, perception is reality on that. You know, I feel like we did a lot of stuff between right to work and prevailing wage and tort reforms and you know, the local and the brunch bill, you know, things in Uber specifically, you know, that are good, actionable things. And like I said, you know, for me as a guy that has a stake in environmental programs and seeing the same buildings remain empty for the last 10 years, I said that if I can get out and I can present a case to a point where I feel like maybe we can fill some of these buildings in the short term, that would be a positive effect that I could garner. And that's really why I decided at this time to jump in.
Why you did 2 years ago?
First of all, I wasn't handpicked by any operative within my own party. I wasn't the first choice of my party. I ran in a primary, and the reason I ran, well, the seat opened up. And I've been, my family's lived on the East End for years. I've been part of this community for a long time. I've also followed politics. I've been a very political person. and someone who's interested in public service. This town had done a lot for me, and to me, it's an honor to be able to somehow pay this town back. So I made a very late night phone call to my predecessor, and when I found out she had decided to run for Congress, and I spoke with her about it. She is a friend of mine, and I said, I'm going to try it. I'm going to try. I've always, I never really saw myself as someone who would be a politician, someone who would run for office. I didn't really live my life gearing up towards any of this. I never really thought that that's something that I would do, but the opportunity presented itself, and so why not? I do know, I know the district very well. I know the people very well, and my neighbors very well. I think I'm a good listener. I think it's one of the most important things is to get out and listen to it's not about always what I want, what I think is best. It's about representing the district well. And this district's been in my blood for a very long time. Now, I do have to respond to, there have been some bills that I've worked very hard on that are now law. Say the West Virginia Property Rescue Initiative. Mayor Nancy Guthrie is the lead sponsor on it. But we all, the Kanawha County delegation, all worked very hard on that, and that's now law. That set aside certain funding from the Housing and Development Fund towards demolition. But unfortunately, we have population loss in many parts of the state to deal with abandoned houses. I plan on, if I'm reelected, working on another bill that would help create a more clear definition of what an abandoned property is to speed that process up so to benefit really the city of Charleston, so they can, over on the west side we have blocks where there are census blocks where there are 30 abandoned houses. They're not going to be fixed. We can't find the landlords. We have to speed the process up. They're a safety hazard. They attract drugs and crime. That's something I plan on working on. Something I think I can get done. Other things, the floor amendments that I was thinking of. There was one floor amendment that really directly affected your business. There was a bill that
process radioactive waste, but
there was a bill that dealt with removing the certificate of need for recycling centers, and they say what fat possums run at night or something. In the middle of the late night committee meetings, oil and gas lobbyists were able to put things into this bill that were a bit dangerous. So it basically opened up our state to collect radioactive drill shavings from the oil and gas industry. So I saw that and I wrote an amendment to it to take everything that they put in a late night committee to remove that from the bill. And I offered the amendment and it passed unanimously because I don't think anybody really wanted to see our state as a dumping ground for radioactive drill shavings, unregulated. It's something we need to be careful about. Everybody wants clean drinking water, especially here in Charleston. You know how that is. But the rest of your question, advice I would give to a freshman delegate: keep an open mind. I've followed politics for a long time. A lot of people who I'm now working with, who I've been reading about in these newspapers for a long time, I found were actually very, very nice people. And I've learned a lot from both sides of the aisle. And I've made friends on both sides of the aisle. And I really enjoy working with most of my colleagues. And I'd say keep an open mind and listen, and just remember, it's what you don't know. Knowing what you don't know is really a good place to be.
What about you? Why not county commission? Why not city council? Why not mayor of Charleston?
I like the legislative branch. I do. I like being able to work together. I like reading the bills, and because it's being a delegate or representative of the district is really what required. Like I said before, being part of the community, listening to people, and carrying that conscience to the cabinet. I like that branch of government.
I have some questions. Sure. Thomas, on your Twitter recently, you tweeted, "If elected, I will introduce a bill preventing public works buildings from being named for people associated with hate groups. Let's not be selective. Remove KKK member Robert C. Byrd's name from all public buildings and highways."
I feel like that's pretty direct, Eric. I'm going to be honest with you. No, I would support
Would
that.
that be a cost prohibitive exercise?
That's hard to say. I think that we're living in this time where we're trying to take these very modern social standards and apply them retroactively across maybe hundreds of years of American government. And I think that unfortunately we've entered a position, because some of these issues are at the forefront of the national conversation, that almost synonymously West Virginia and Senator Byrd's past are mentioned in tandem. And I think that that is an embarrassment. And I think that if we're going to make a kerfuffle out of videos that low-level staffers make, then we should apply that same standard to the top-level people.
I don't support, I wouldn't support any legislation to remove Robert C. Byrd's name from anything. I don't think that's a good way to spend taxpayers' money.
Oh, I'm not talking about just Robert C. Byrd. I think, if you have an affiliation with a hate group, and I think that one is very, very hard to deny in the specific instance that we're talking about, regardless of whether you're a senator or a county commissioner or a city councilor. I do sort of think that should prohibit you from being memorialized in public works. I think that it's insincere, and I think that to have that association directly with our state and a number of publicly funded facilities is just wrong.
So you take the names off the buildings, take the signs off the roads.
Yeah, I think that's reasonable.
All of Robert C. Byrd.
I don't think that's reasonable. And you mentioned the kerfuffle over a video from a low-level staffer. Well, I try to represent everybody in my district, and I don't see how, how certain people in our district, everybody in our district is going to feel like they're being equally represented by their attorney general when there are folks who, recently made videos for white supremacist groups. And I think that the attorney general did the right thing in removing her from the office.
Absolutely.
But I don't think it was just a kerfuffle. I mean, I try to be empathetic, and I say, how can somebody, people I represent in my neighborhood, how are they going to feel when they see that they got somebody working in the attorney general's office that's in a white supremacist video? I just try to put myself in their shoes and feel, how are they going to feel equally represented?
Well, let me ask you this, Mike. Do you feel like employers are directly responsible for every facet of an employee's life prior to their employment?
When they're a public employee, she was, well, let's put it this way, when the video was made, I believe, and I don't know Carrie Bose, I don't know her at all. I think I met her, I might have met her casually or something, I don't remember.
Well, no,
But what
I think
I'm
you're
getting at, she worked for the
I'm in
Family
agreement
Policy,
with
she
you
worked for the
that
Family
Mr.
Policy
Dorsey was
Council.
correct.
When the
His
video was
actions.
made, she was working for the Family Policy Council. That's where she was hired from. That's a group that I feel has, to me, their primary purpose is to promote discrimination of the LGBT community. And that's where she was hired from. So I have a problem with that.
Well, but you're still not answering my question. Okay, specific to you. Is your employer liable for any poor decisions that you made before you became their employer?
I'm self-employed.
Can I ask another quick question?
Sure.
You also talk about moving the airport to the Hobet site. Are you saying you want to move Yeager Airport to the Hobet site?
Oh man, boy, I could bend your ear on what I feel is the potential for the Hobet site.
You're serious about moving Yeager Airport to the Hobet mine site?
I think we absolutely need to explore that as an anchor stone for development of that site. I would also, since you asked, and let me preface this by saying, I think the two absolute most important sites in southern West Virginia for industrial development are Hobet and the Heartland Intermodal Gateway in Pritchard. Those two things in tandem could completely revitalize our economy. Now, the problem with Hobet at this time is we don't have anybody interested. There's 0 people who have said, I'd really like to pledge some money to go to Hobet and build a facility. And I think that it's a very easy argument to make that Yeager Airport is insufficient. It's not capable of handling large traffic. It's very difficult to get in and out of there. The runway fell off the hillside. there's a lot of problems that are stacking up with this, and we're starting to see voices that want to put more money into this project. So I think that if and this is a multi-step concept, if we can find someone that's willing to say, yes, I would be willing to develop a private business at the Hobet Industrial Site, provided that we had transportation. We can find out a way to incentivize cheap power, because at this point in time, cheap electricity is becoming more and more scarce in America, and that's really on some of the higher end industrial developments, particularly anything dealing with aluminum. That's a very important consideration. So if we can find somebody willing to say, yes, I will provide cheap power to the Hobet Industrial Site, and we can form a coalition, and it would have to be multi-county and probably originate in the legislature, just given the way that our government is structured, to say, we would be interested in building a modern commercial airport at this site. I think that across the board, that's just a win for everybody.
I wouldn't support that. Fort Yeager Airport right where it is. It's in Kanawha County. The district I represent is in Kanawha County. This is where the population center is. Not only that, there was an FAA study done years ago when they were talking about having a regional airport. It said it would not be cost effective and it wouldn't be funded at all by the FAA. And I tell you, the biggest reason why I wouldn't support that is because we would probably lose the Air Guard, the 130th, if we move that airport. That's over 1,000 jobs just on the Guard side. That's over $100 million in salaries going into our local economy here in Kanawha County. And with the current way Washington, D.C. is right now, I don't think we can count on them funding to rebuild an Air National Guard base. That's where the base is, and I'll do what I can to keep the airport there, keep our base intact, because it provides a lot of jobs here in the county that I represent.
Can I follow up on that?
Yeah, sure.
And I think that this is a question that's plagued West Virginia for a long time. Is protectionism for a small entity preferable to a larger scale development that will support all of the surrounding counties? I think something that we really overlook here in Charleston when we're talking about economic development and things that are moving in the future is that realistically, nobody's going to plop down a factory on the flat here. We just don't do business like that anymore. Nobody's going to go to the former Great Lakes site in Nitro and say, gosh, I'd love to build a small plastic refinery here. The way that industrial companies build now is they want a large swath that is otherwise not disturbed. They don't have to worry about residential around it. They don't have to worry about people coming in and complaining about whatever they're doing. And because of that, people seem to build on these more exurb sites and find bedroom communities. And I think that that's something that we need to examine moving forward in Charleston as a way to kind of help bolster our economy, because people already commute. I commute to Huntington every day, not because I wanted to, but because that's where I was able to find opportunity. People commute to Sissonville, people commute to Buffalo, so to use Charleston as a bedroom community where the people that are going to work at a potential development in Hobet as a facility, as a bedroom community, and say, gosh, this is a nice place to live, and I make a 20-minute drive south is not unreasonable for how communities are developing in the 21st century, and it's not unreasonable to boost our tax base. Yeager, even General Yeager himself has tweeted that he was not supportive of Yeager Airport being on the hill, and that he felt like there were some issues that prevented the Midway Airport from being built when it was an option. And I really try not to engage in hypothetical situations, but as a big what if. I think it's reasonable to speculate what would our area's development have looked like if we did have a major modern airport, and it ties into my concept on Pritchard. One of the biggest economic inhibitors is that we don't have a way, not necessarily to get cargo out quickly, but a number of companies that are manufacturing now bring their parts in from elsewhere, and we can't get stuff in quickly enough. And I think that to address that issue, makes us a lot more viable long-term for a sustainable industrial development.
I don't think that the Air National Guard is a small entity, and I don't believe that it's protectionism to look out for those over 1,300 jobs, over $100 million worth of salaries that will be lost. Not guaranteed to come back. Not guaranteed to come back in Boone County. we would be losing our airport.
I mean, again, you're engaging in a purely hypothetical. You're assuming that if we have
No,
two
we don't.
airports, that one airport has to go away, and I don't agree with that.
Well, I'll be on the side of protecting jobs in the county.
Okay, we'll end it with that. We thank you very much. Our hour is up, so we thank you very much both for coming out.
Thank you.
It's been a pleasure, truly.
Thanks for coming.
So.
Very good. I hope if nothing else, everyone was entertained.